Okay, we're rolling.
All right, thank you. Welcome everybody to the, what's today, August 5th meeting of the Tompkins Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Thank you for joining us. And our first speaker will be Amanda Spellacy, Regional Director for Senator Chuck Schumer, the Minority Leader in the Senate. Kathy, you said she's already called in?
No,
Okay.
She hasn't called in yet. She just accepted the invite, so I assume she'll be dialing in any minute.
All right, she has to be off the phone staffing Senator Schumer at a rally, a virtual rally at 12. So we wanted to make sure we had a chance to hear from Amanda. I know Deborah Dawson is participating in a NISAC committee meeting right now, and she, if she can, she'll join us about halfway through this committee meeting. So are there any other, while we wait for Amanda to call in, are there any other changes to the agenda? Anything you have, Kathy?
No.
Okay, and while we're at it, is there any public comment that you have?
No, I did not receive any.
Okay.
And Amanda has just joined us.
All right, Amanda, welcome.
Hi, Martha. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Thank you so much for taking the time during this big crunch time week. We really appreciate your being with us, and just want to, I bet you can guess what's on our minds. So anything you can share.
You want to talk about baseball, right?
Yeah, let's talk about baseball. That's a good idea.
Some days I would much rather. Yeah, this is an incredibly important week, and I'm happy to kind of give you a flavor or context of where we're at with things. What I think I'll do is, as I told Martha, I have to, I'm staffing the senator. He and Congressman Jeffries are doing a virtual rally with a bunch of healthcare advocates around the state to kind of energize them to keep the momentum up as we're in this busy week. So I have to jump to do that right before noon. So I will give you a quick kind of overview, and then if there are any questions, I'll try to take a couple to make sure that we're talking about what you're most interested in until I have to jump to that other Zoom. So I won't go into, the HEROES Act. We all know about it. We know the specifics. In fact, you've had a lot of time to become intimately familiar with it. But as you know, over 2 months ago, the House passed a $3 trillion bill that was crafted by Speaker Pelosi in close concert with Senator Schumer, that it went on to the House or onto the Senate. And when it arrived in the Senate, Mitch McConnell pronounced it dead on arrival, and there it sat. And it has been sitting there ever since. We've had Senate work periods that have come and gone, and during that time, we've had jobs eroded, we've had lives lost, we've had escalations of the virus, and Senator McConnell, frankly, focused on passing judicial nominees. In fact, he then even sent his members home for July recess, all along not having addressed the need for a COVID-4 bill and being acutely aware of deadlines that were looming, that at the end of July, we would have an expiration of the pandemic unemployment insurance, the supplemental that has been credited with keeping over 12 million Americans out of poverty. That the protections to insulate renters and homeowners from evictions and foreclosures would erode, and many other things. And then we returned with 2 weeks, and we had finally had some legislative text emerge, which has been called the HEALS Act. And meanwhile, we have 150,000 Americans who've lost their lives. We have over 50 million jobs that have been lost in this country. We have over 4.5 million Americans who have been sickened. And what do we have? We have a Republican caucus that is in disarray. Last count I heard, over 20 Republican members have told Senator McConnell they won't vote for anything. It's not clear who supports what. The good news is we do have some negotiations that have gone on in the last week. I guess that's the high point in all of this. And, almost on a daily basis, the principals, and those principals include Secretary Mnuchin, Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, Senator Schumer, and Speaker Pelosi, have sat together and had dialogue with the staff, supplementing in between. So there is conversations happening. But I'll note that Mitch McConnell is not part of these negotiations. So it's like a two-legged stool. You have the administration and you have the Democratic leadership of the legislative branch, but you don't have the Republican leadership. And we have two big elements that we have to figure out. One is how much do we spend and what buckets do we put it into? And we're really far apart. We have a $3 trillion proposal in the HEROES Act, and they have a $1+ trillion proposal in their HEALS Act. That's a big delta to overcome. And how much that bill can ultimately be will determine, a lot of where those funding priorities are going. What are we doing? Well, Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi are holding strong on critical elements. They are still advocating for that $3.4 trillion price tag. And I won't go through all of the particular buckets that we're championing. They're all critically important, or they, wouldn't have been part of the proposal. But certainly things that are at the top of those lists are the food support, maintaining the SNAP to make sure that we don't have Americans going hungry in the face of all of this, that we have protections to keep our citizens in their dwellings, whether they rent or they own their homes, that we have an extension of the supplemental pandemic unemployment insurance, that we have money for state and local governments, that we have robust funding for our education system so that regardless of what the delivery of education has to be as dictated by regional needs or governors or states, that there is adequate funding to make sure that our school-age children are getting education that we need, and that's just a few. Can't forget the post office and election security, critically important at this time. And I will point out that we are at the end of a work period. We are in the waning days before there is an August recess. And, Speaker McConnell controls both what is on the legislative calendar and when it happens. And so I don't know what's going to happen next week. I know I was on a call this morning, and the Speaker and Senator Schumer are back at it with conversations and negotiations today, and we'll keep you obviously informed, and as well, I'm sure, reports that come out. But that's kind of a lay of the land of where we are. And then I can probably, if there's our questions, I'd be happy to answer a couple quick while we have some time. And as you can tell, we're frustrated. You can hear it in my voice.
We can hear it, Amanda. Yes, and thank you very much for that quick summary. We really appreciate it. Let me do a couple quick questions. Do you have a sense that McConnell is kind of sitting back, waiting to see what the White House will support? He's obviously been in a situation a number of times of agreeing to something and then thinking the White House is with him, and then that changes. Is that part of the calculation?
I truly don't know. I don't think any of us know what Mitch McConnell ultimately resides in his head and his heart. Clearly, the fact that the administration is the front of the negotiations, there's deference to them there. I know. I believe I have heard him say along the lines, and this is not verbatim by any means, that what they sort of craft, he'll work to advance it whether he likes it or not. So that may tip his hat, but I don't know.
Okay.
But clearly the administration is taking the lead. And I will also say, as my boss has said publicly, that now granted, the president is not, his proxies are there, but negotiating with the president is like nailing Jell-O to a wall.
Okay. And I just want to mention also that our Chamber of Commerce held a roundtable on Monday with OCs, with a TC3 representative, with Kathy Schlutter from the Human Services Commission Coalition, and obviously the Chamber. I was on that, and I'll send you a link to that. It was a good broad-based call for support for state and local governments because of how many ripple effects there are when
that's right.
Schools are
it's the underpinnings of everything.
Right. So
100%.
I have a question about what I've read about the HEALS Act funding for K to 12. Is it all dependent on the schools reopening, and what flavor of reopening is that? Kind of, if so, is that like 5 days a week, or is it partial reopening would qualify? Can you tell me anything about that?
I am not versed on every specific. I think the top line is there's not a ton of specificity because, regardless of what the administration has said about, he'll open all the schools or no, he won't, it's actually a state decision. So you're going to have patchworks and nuances in terms of what that reopening may look like that is ultimately a state, a state at the state discretion. I I think what I saw is that maybe 50% or a significant portion of that funding would be predicated on a reopening. What that reopening would entail, I don't know that I can speak to 100%. So I think it is a mix, but obviously there is more money available to incentivize school districts and schools and states to reopen their schools in some fashion.
Okay. And we're having Sarah Clark. I guess Sarah Clark is already on this call. Hi, Sarah. And
A few other people have questions.
yes, Anna, just a second. And Allison Hunt from Tom Reed's office will be on at 1 o'clock on this call. So we'll hear from her as well. But it's good to hear just one other question. We get a sense that sort of how the sausage is made is everybody holds their public positions until there's a full agreement. And then you see where people have both sides would have flexed. Do you have any hope that that's kind of how this is going? So the public intransigence may mask more progress. Do you have any sense of that?
I think anything is possible. I think that we are, pretty committed to the positions that we have held. I think there have been some reports from sources that I would say are probably on the administration side about, they're making some concessions. But I think that, I think you've got some, what do I want to say? I don't want to characterize how the negotiations are going in either front, and I don't want to, I don't want to tip anybody's hand, I guess, in terms of where things may be or not be. But there are some strong personalities, and there are some, frankly, critically important issues at stake that require a lot of strength and solidarity in terms of those positions. So I would say that the positions that are publicly articulated by Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi are those that they hold.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Anna and then Shauna. You're muted, Anna.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Hi, Anna.
Hi. A few quick questions. So I'll just throw them out there and you can answer in whatever order is inspiring. We've heard word that there is some receptivity to expanding PUA. And I was curious if you could share what you're hearing. Another, we have Sue Dale Hall on the call here to talk to us in a bit about childcare. There's a great article that came out in the New York Times. It's not really considered in the same bucket as education, but it's where 85% of the brain develops, and there is tremendous education.
Your question
I'm very worried about it being sort of shunted aside. So curious what discussions you've been hearing about support for childcare. And the last is the question you mentioned, 20 Republicans aren't interested at all in any vote. And I'm curious what influence you feel that they might have on the final process. So those are my three questions.
Great questions. So there are lots of sort of on the PUI front, there were lots of things floating around in the ether in terms of different proposals. Last week we had I think it was Ron Johnson had a bill to do a $200 a week, which, we shot down. There have been conversations. I think I just saw something reported this morning about a notion of trying to go week by week. I think that in general, the posture for any of these negotiation points is if you start parsing things out and peeling away layers, you weaken your position across the board. So the goal is to try not to tease things out. Obviously, we are critically concerned about the vulnerabilities of those who just had the entire safety net yanked out from underneath them. And I would say at this point, it's more talk than anything concrete happening, but the ultimate goal, is to make sure that we get something as quickly as possible, but as robustly as possible put in place. Because as we know, when you have, stats like 12 million individuals kept out of poverty because of this pandemic unemployment, you really can't start whittling away the efficacy of that. So I think the best thing I can say is for right now, it's a lot of talk. There's not a lot of anything concrete happening, other than advocacy to do what I said, at least on our part. Certainly childcare is something, it's has a very generous bucket in the HEROES Act. I think that, leadership on the Democratic side is acutely aware of the role that plays, both in terms of providing formative education, but it also is a linchpin to making sure that our economy can also recover. Parents need to be able to have that access point so that they can return to work and they can do so safely, and that they have the support to see that happens. Particularly, the other element here is if we end up with a lot of remote learning and there are parents who are going back to work, that child care component becomes even more critical. So that is something that is certainly being supported and upheld. And I know that Sarah can probably talk. I know her boss has done a lot of putting the spotlight on that in the last couple of weeks, and she'll probably talk to you more about that. So I don't want to take her thunder. And then in terms of the 20 Republicans, I don't have any idea what goes on in the caucus room of Mitch McConnell, other than to say that when, not being able to hold a caucus together weakens him on all fronts. What will be the calculus? I don't know how that affects what he can or cannot do. I suspect that probably is in part why he has stayed out of some of the negotiations. But it does obviously make it more difficult to have a consensus of what points that they want to hold firm to when they have so many individuals who are touting different perspectives and different positions. But I think, as we have seen, the past is not great prologue for anything. You can only count on what's actually happening before your eyes. And, we will learn as we go. And I don't want to make any assumptions about what that can mean, because I don't know. Other than I will say, as someone who works for the minority, it is. I wish it was not in this space, but it is certainly enlightening to see that there's a house divided.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish it was in a different time and in a different circumstance.
Yeah.
Don't we all?
But a house
we have
divided
Shauna.
usually provides some more vulnerabilities.
Right. I got Shauna and then Henry.
Hi, Amanda. Thank you for coming today. My question is around unemployment. The most response that I've heard back from my constituents is that they're concerned about the $600 per week going away. And I know what's on the table right now is around $200 and 70% of someone's income. Where do you think we're going to land on that? And my second question is, what is the time frame?
And I say this with all due respect, that if I knew the answer to either one of those, I would have just played the lottery and probably solved a lot of our problems.
Okay.
But that being said, I think that the $200 amount is woefully inadequate. I think that is generally held among the Democratic caucus.
Yeah.
The 70% income replacement isn't potentially. I probably gets us closer to where we should be in the conversation. And truth be told, when the concept of pandemic unemployment overlay was first sort of introduced in the CARES Act negotiations. And so when we talk about that, remember that's two things. One, expanding the universe of who's eligible for pandemic unemployment. So we expanded who could partake under normal circumstances, who could not. So you're like self-employed, your gig workers, things like that. And then also the second piece is that $600. One of the reasons why, so there was a conversation about trying to have a percentage of income, or, a way to, one of the criticisms advanced is that in some cases, and there's not evidence that this is broad, there are people who are making more on unemployment than they did in the job that they lost. That was not so it was a discussion point of how to sort of have a cap, say, here's the overlay up to the income that was displaced. The problem with that 70% notion now, or what was talked about early on, is that the states have antiquated infrastructure, so they can't readily implement a system like that. And it would have added great delays to the dissemination of these payments, which was so critical to get them into the hands of people. So I think that talking about that 70% issue, one of the challenges is, I think it'd be very difficult to come right off the bat with that as the way you were going to go, because the infrastructure disseminated isn't there. So sometimes you see it's put together where we'll do, you could do like 200 until August or October or something like that, when the states would have their infrastructure better ready to go. I don't know. I don't know what the ultimate, I don't know where either one of these will go. Obviously, again, I think our goal is to push for as quickly and robustly our return of pandemic employment as possible. But those are two conversations that are out there. But I don't think that the income replacement percentage would be the easiest to do right off the bat.
Thank you very much.
Henry.
Yes, Amanda, thank you for coming. I have two questions. One is, do you see the Republicans submitting partial or skinny reform bills to get the Senate to vote on something? Also, what's the time frame? I saw that Chuck Schumer basically and Nancy Pelosi agreed that they could try to do things for the weekend, to Friday, but also that, that there's some talk about extending things for next week.
There's lots of talk about a lot of things. The time frame that we would like would have been 2 months ago. The Friday deadline or the Friday goal that has suddenly, been floated out there, that was something that I think it was Secretary Mnuchin, frankly, was the one who said it when they came out of session. So that came from them. There's no agreement to have anything done by a certain time except yesterday, right? That was the first one. The second question, I'm sorry, I forgot what your first question
was about whether Republicans are going to submit any kind of skinny amendments, or any kind of skinny votes on just like the partial $200 on unemployment benefits, just to basically get a vote on the floor.
So, they don't really tip their hand about what their legislative strategies are. I mean, certainly I know that there are those who surmise that may happen. I think we are and I say we, I'm being so bold as to speak for the speaker, but we're sort of wedded to the notion that skinny bills where you start teasing out or parsing out certain components to try to get something done, really dilutes the position that you have and sort of the efficacy of the total package. So, our hope and our goal is to get as robust a full package as possible instead of piecemealing things here and there, which then may make it harder to push for some other things.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Amanda.
I think I can do one more if there is, and then.
Okay, are there any
We'll have
other
to go
legislative
rally.
questions? And then anybody on the staff here, Natalie or Sue or Dale or Kate, any questions from you guys?
Yes, I'm here, Natalie. Hi,
Sure,
Amanda.
okay.
Thank you.
Hi.
Quickly.
Mike, did you have something first?
No, that's fine, Natalie. Go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Amanda. I'm asking this question with a little bit of Hill background as well. Thank you for the update. I'm the executive director of the Tompkins County Workforce Development Board. So we're dealing with a whole host of workforce questions at once. The unemployment insurance and the $600 really being top of mind. But alongside that, we're really watching the numbers for workforce development programs. And, my really simple thought is that if House and Senate, Republican and Democrat, are 1,000 miles apart, this could be a bridge. So with workforce development programs, we're talking about three things at once. We're talking about job creation. We're talking about getting people who've been home for 5 months reskilled and upskilled. And we're talking about getting the unemployment rate down. And so we know that a lot of the national partners are asking for $15 billion. I know that the reality of that is not there. But even the numbers in the HEROES Act are way too low. And I don't know if any of this has been part of the conversation, but traditionally in a recession, and I know we're different now, but workforce development does get an investment, and we're just not seeing that this time. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I think those are great points that you raise, and obviously having worked for Senator Schumer through the last recession and the value that a lot of those programs have had, I'm acutely aware of what you speak and what you reference. I guess I would say, and I guess this is sort of my words more than the senators, but we're still sort of in a it is uncharted territory. And I know, I think I said this to Martha a couple of times, so I'm sorry to sound like a broken record, but we're sort of trying to survive and stimulate at the same time. And we are still very much in a survival mode. And I suspect that, there is very likely we will not see another giant, COVID bill for a while after this, if we get this. But I don't think that means that we won't see smaller issue oriented and maybe more stimulus focused kinds of measures that, the need will be illuminated as we continue to move through and see, as the dust starts to settle. And there certainly should be and would be more opportunities to look at some of those things. I would think that the fact that it is acknowledged and included in the HEROES bill is acknowledgement of the value that workforce development programs have, and helps us further the conversation and, maybe find more avenues to try to add to programs in other capacities. But I think they're really good points. And I certainly will make sure I pass them along.
Thank you. Mike, do you
Yeah.
have a quick one?
Thank you.
And then I would
Mike?
just say in closing, since I have 3 minutes left to be on my Zoom, is, I get the question a lot. People ask me, what do we do? And particularly since many of you are in the local municipal government space, and you're looking at your budgets and you're waiting to see what you hear from the state. I had a county executive that I work with send me a text and ask me if now was the time to start a hunger strike to prove his point. And I asked him to hang in there, to start a hunger strike, in protest to try to up the ante. And so it's not funny because I know that that's about where he feels he's at. And the senator spent weeks traveling around talking to many of you, and he knows that that's the burden that's on all of your shoulders. And so I would say two things. I mean, I hate to be a broken record, but back months ago, we had a supplemental that was being negotiated. And one of the things that, the point of the supplemental and the overtures that Senator McConnell had made was to plus up the PPP program. And we held firm and said that if we were going to put more money into the CARES Act, there were a couple of tenets we needed to look at. One of them was our healthcare system. Yes, PPP, and we needed to make it more accessible and friendly for, smaller community banks and women and minority-owned businesses to make sure that the assistance was getting where it needed, but that we also needed to fight for state and local funding. And at the time, Senator Schumer negotiated and worked on a formula that was all-encompassing. It touched upon every single level of municipalities, so your towns, your villages, your cities, your counties, and your states were going to receive funds. And it wasn't intended to be an end-all, be-all, but it was something to stave you over. And I know, Martha, you and I talked, and I said, mark my words, Mitch McConnell doesn't want to do another COVID bill. I know what you're hearing from some of your other representatives about it'll get done, but it's going to be months and months, and we'll be into September. And so it is really regrettable, and it's really frustrating that we had a $150 billion proposal that would have brought millions of dollars into the county, into the cities, and, thousands and thousands of dollars into towns and villages. That didn't happen, and here we are. And I hate it, and I regret it. And my boss is acutely aware, as I know Senator Gillibrand is, because she also has traveled the state talking about this during recess. If we were sent home, we were going to make good use of our time. And so I say this because we are here, and the best thing that you can do is if you have the luxury of having a representative that is on the other side of the aisle, because you're right, your senators are with you. They need to put their money where their mouth is. They should have done it months and months ago, and they didn't, and it needs to happen now. The second thing that you can do is to keep telling your stories. That's the message that Senator is going to deliver to the advocates that he's going to be speaking to. Help uplift us by telling your stories far and wide. Talk about the challenges that the local governments are facing and the horrendous tasks at hand at reducing workforces, which will only add to our unemployment rates, which will cut services, which will make sure that we can do even less with even less. Tell the stories about the nonprofits that are doing, God's work with nothing, how important having access to SNAP to make sure that no child and no family goes hungry during this pandemic. The worker who lost their job and whose family is 100% dependent on that pandemic unemployment insurance. Tell those stories to anyone who will listen and through whatever channels you have, because that is how we collectively will move the dial. We will hold firm and negotiate and fight for you in Washington, but it's your stories that we have that we can tell that really make it real. And I urge you this week to find those avenues to do that.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Perfect.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the hospitality as always. I hope everyone stays well, and I will keep you posted, and we'll keep fighting for you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Best to the senator. Thank you so very much.
Thanks.
Okay, great. All right. Well, and that's exactly the flavor in which we, the spirit in which we put together the chamber roundtable. So I would urge everyone on the call to go to the chamber website or go to the email that I sent out last night with a link to the chamber roundtable and get people to write into McConnell, write into the White House, because the phone lines apparently aren't taking messages, and call Tom Reed. So, all right. And I'm delighted that we have Sarah Clark here. And I hope that you're with us, Sarah, and you can pick up. Hi, Sarah. Hello. And it is, Amanda kind of teed it up for you. So go for it. You know, anything else that you would like to add? And yes, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. I was just going to say ditto and then just like hang up and everything Amanda said. No, the first and foremost, and thank you, Sue, for the amazing event in Ithaca with the senator. She did a really great video. If you guys want to get any of her social media of all 6 stops that she and the lieutenant governor did across the state on childcare, and it was really actually kind of moving to watch. The numbers I can tell you on it, obviously we have heard from experts across the state that there needs to be another $50 billion to shore up and protect our childcare system through this. The HEROES Act only had $7 billion in it. The Senate negotiators have come back. You know, the first bill that obviously didn't go anywhere that the majority has offered had $15 billion in it. So the one good news I would say on childcare is that it does tend to be bipartisan and there is support for it across the board. Obviously, even $15 billion, which would be great to have it be more than what was in the HEROES Act, but the $50 billion is still what we're hearing and what the senator is pushing for. We're hearing from a lot of different, I know the state, they're also looking at how to tweak that language to really make sure the money goes in there for both providers and scholarships for essential workers who are being not forced, but you know, are required to work sometimes in riskier situations. I look at teachers even as schools are opening and what that's going to look like, but to make sure that not only the providers have access to some extra funding, but also those who are essential and putting themselves out there on the front line and giving them some kinds of scholarship to help offset some of those childcare costs. So that is definitely a really big piece of the senator's priority. She's doing a whole press conference today on her final sort of drop dead. These are the things that we need to make sure are in it. It includes the extension of the pandemic unemployment insurance, pandemic SNAP, and the food. So both pandemic SNAP, which would help for those right now, if you're out of school for 5 days, and you qualify for SNAP, you get an extra bump up. They're trying to not only expand it longer, but with these hybrid models that are being suggested for the fall, we want to fix it to make sure that even if you're only out of school for 3 days a week, that you can still qualify for the extra funding in your SNAP benefits for families whose children are usually getting their meals at school. So we are fighting for that. We're actually going to do an event on Friday on that bill in Elmira. So I'm happy to send that if anyone's interested in it with the food bank down there, which is obviously covers up to Tompkins County. So this is a big priority for them. The childcare piece, local and state aid, which includes her direct relief for local governments. So instead of just for communities that don't qualify for community development block grant money, they would still get a formulaic direct funding piece out of the, that is her goal, because a lot of the smaller communities are not getting the direct money. So that is another piece of her priorities. And then eviction protection and extending the moratorium on both renters and homeowners who are really not able to. We're going to have a huge issue on our hand if that just ends abruptly. So we really need to look at both extending it, but also looking at ways to ease it. And I get it that it's complicated and there's always upstream issues if you just tell people they don't have to pay their rent. But I think there are ways that we're working through some of the homelessness programs that would allow communities to have renters assistance and other funding so that we could ease that issue and protect people who are really struggling right now. So those are her priorities. They're very similar to the minority leader's priorities. She's not in the negotiations like Minority Leader Schumer is, but she does have his ear and is telling her priorities. So that's where we are right now.
Thanks very much, Sarah. I did see that the HEROES Act had $7 billion for childcare, and the McConnell bill had 15. I thought, well, that was probably an easy compromise that the Democrats would be happy to add $8 billion to childcare, right? It's like, sure, we'll do that.
Sure, yeah.
So, yeah. I see Anna's hand. Anna?
Well, yeah, I should have written down my questions. So why don't you go to another person and come back to me because I forgot it. But
okay, Mike Sigler, you.
And also my internet is not working.
Okay, I guess broadband is another question. We can get Mike. That you didn't get a chance to ask Amanda a question. Do you have anything now?
Sure. I mean, the broadband was actually one of the parts of the question. We're trying to do a build out in Lansing. We have some funding sources for that, but obviously it's something we connect the whole town. So that's one question. But the other question was, I was interested in the Kodak deal where they're going to get funded to produce the raw materials for pharmaceuticals. That seems like a long-term plan. I didn't know if there was anything our county can do to position ourselves better for that kind of future where we're going to be bringing a lot more of those businesses back on shore. So.
Yeah, I mean, the Kodak deal still has a lot of details that we're awaiting. It is literally in my backyard. So I am excited to hear about it, but also still do have some questions. But I think the one thing that's happening for sure through this whole pandemic is looking at supply chains and where we are vulnerable in our country. I know food is one of them, but I think pharmaceuticals has become one. And then some of the PPE and manufacturing. So I think, like Amanda said, there's probably not going to be another sort of relief bill after this current one that hopefully we can get through. But I do think there will be some real conversations about how do we invest in our supply chains and how can communities really take advantage of that to reshore what is so critical to us all the time, but really shows up in a pandemic. So the Kodak deal, from my understanding, isn't really going to be a short-term fix to address the pandemic, but is a long-term fix to what they're seeing as a problem for generic drugs and the supply chain of those things that are now 100% coming from China. So I do think there will be some opportunities, and I think it's something we should really make sure we're including our economic development agencies and our local governments in as we prepare to sort of create those. I know Anna put up something on the stimulus bill in the 2009 and how much of that was infrastructure, and it worked. It really did work with jobs. I think the biggest complaint we heard about it is that you had to be shovel ready, and no one knew that they, the year before, no one knew that was going to happen and to be shovel ready. So I think we know infrastructure works, but maybe we don't necessarily need shovel ready. We need to help communities get shovel ready and then be able to take advantage of these new opportunities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I that's a good point. I think we are well positioned in terms of pharmaceuticals. We've got a lot of high-tech sort of health-related companies in Tompkins County. So they'll be
And
looking.
Corning is doing the vials. I mean, they're supposed to make 350 million vaccine vials by the end of this year as part of the push to be ready for the vaccine. So I think there is like a whole infrastructure that we are sort of creating in upstate that Tompkins could really take advantage of too.
And broadband, I saw that, to Mike's question, I saw that in the HEROES Act, it's talked about as, there's some money in there, and it's talked about as kind of homework access, you know, sort of to support education. So is that still in the?
Yeah, I mean, I think the disparities are pretty glaring, both in inner cities and rural areas of what learning online looks like. So I do think that my guess is there will be something on broadband in this next act as well, or whatever the final negotiated, because there is going to be this divide heading into the school year. And I think depending on, you know, if there is a second round or a second wave, we need our infrastructure to really be ready, which it probably won't be ready by then. But again, it's one of those long-term problems that we really need to address. The senator has been very vocal on the broadband, any broadband bill, any rural broadband bill really has to address the last mile, which is often always the most expensive piece of it, and the ones that private companies won't do without government investment. So we need to treat it like a utility. We need to make sure that the government's investing in those last miles so that it's something people can't live without it anymore. I mean, we just have to get over this. So
That's right, like rural electrification during the Depression.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Mike Lane.
Hello, Sarah. Awfully glad to have you with us, and hope to see you from time to time at these meetings. They're very, very useful. I chair our county census committee, and we're very worried about undercount of population.
How are you guys doing in Tompkins?
We're only about 58%, and I think nationwide they're at 65 or 67%. We're hamstringed because a lot of our population is students, which are supposed to be counted here.
Mm-hmm.
Not only the ones who live in group quarters like dormitories, but we have a large population that lives off campus,
Mm-hmm.
in apartments and other in rooms and other things. And when they went home, a lot of them probably got counted at home rather than here. We understood that there was some discussion about having some congressional hearings about the idea of finding ways to help municipalities, or a lot of our education-based municipalities across the country that are on the same boat, about trying to figure this out. And then yesterday we heard that they're going to stop the follow-up counting as of September 30th.
Mm-hmm.
We thought it was at least going to go to October 31st. And that's going to just hurt us even more. We're hearing from our local census representatives that they're just starting the actual follow-up with people who have not responded to the census online or other ways. So I wondered if you're hearing anything, and just wanted to express, and perhaps you would pass on to Senator Gillibrand, our real concern here and our need for help to get an accurate count.
Yes, that the September 30th took us all by surprise. It just seems, with all the challenges we normally have, plus the ones we are having this year, it seems very short-sighted. We are pushing back on it. I don't know if it'll change anything. Anything you can do, if officially, if the county want to weigh in at all with a letter to the senator and just making sure she understands what communities are facing, particularly in the higher ed communities. Here in Monroe County, the county is at or above the national average, but the city is really struggling and is well below. So I know cities are having issues, and then the communities of higher ed, I think are really important for her to understand that as well. So I will share that. If you want to do anything more official to make sure she understands, we'd take that as well. So
We did send out a letter to the federal and state census top officials and
okay.
copy the senator on that, but we could be glad to send a letter to her directly if that's a good idea.
Yeah, always. And you can email it to me if that works, or even just email me that letter. That the one you sent to the census officials should be fine. But that way I can make sure it's flagged for our team. Mail has not been fantastic during these work from home times. So
Well, there are elements trying to kill the post office, aren't there?
don't even get me started.
Right. I see Kate Supron on this from Cornell. Before I go to her, and if you hold on to your questions, does the White House actually have the ability to just stop the count?
I mean, I think that it was extended because of COVID and now they're retreating back. I mean, I think they have a lot of broad authority. Will it hold? I don't know.
Okay. So Kate Supron is Cornell's point person on the census. Delighted that you're here, Kate. Maybe you can fill us in on what you're doing.
Sure. I'd actually been emailing with Martha just this morning on this topic, and I think Mike might have been on that email as well. Cornell is going to comply with the request from the Census Bureau that came out in late June to higher ed institutions to report on its off-campus students in addition to the group quarters count. We are changing our directory information policy so that we can do that without violating the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act. And the registrar's office will begin the week of August 17th to pull the data, and we'll have it in by the August 26th deadline for group quarters count. So that should help locally with our count for university students. It does not, of course, address the other traditionally undercounted groups. So we'll hope that they change the date, because that's kind of crazy.
I know.
So
Yeah.
and Diane, I know, has been, Diane Miller, who's on the call from our Washington office, has been really actively engaged with Carolyn Maloney's office, who is heavily involved in the census as well. So she may have thoughts to add.
Hi, Diane. Did you want to add anything?
Whoops, you'd think that after how many months on Zoom, I would have this figured out, and I still don't know which buttons to push. So Carolyn's been engaged. She's got other issues she's dealing with right now too. But she has been heavily engaged on the census, and she has been receptive to every single concern that we've addressed to her, and on top of it before we even think to ask her the question. And so in that sense, she's a good partner and advocate for us. And so we just keep chipping away. But on the other hand, if there are things that Congress can do to basically keep the count open until the last possible second, that can only help at Cornell, because as Kate was saying, just the chaos with the move back in where the students are, plus FERPA ties our hands on certain things, and the county depends on Cornell's count to have an accurate count. So, and I imagine it's the same up there in Rochester too, where you're at with the schools there as well. So keeping that issue in mind, I think, would be super important.
Kate and Diane, does the directory that you have include graduate students?
Yes, it's all students. What it wouldn't include are students have the option under FERPA to opt out of the sharing of directory information. We don't know what percentage of students have opted out until the data gets pulled, because the registrar's office is swamped right now. The other piece for off-campus students, we will have name and date of birth. Until the coming academic year, off-campus students have not been required to submit their local addresses. It is requested information through the registrar's office, but we will only have a portion of the local addresses. But our hope is that with the name and date of birth and the city, that the census will be able to work their magic to figure out double counts. Because the other piece, of course, is that even though the count is low, it's not nothing. So many students have been counted here. Some may have been erroneously counted at home. And the census has assured us that there is a process to identify and remove those double counts. That it is better for someone to be, you want them submitted where they should be in any way possible, and hope that they get pulled elsewhere. So, and we've changed, and I think that period has passed. We changed our directory information policy for Cornell because it was so restrictive or protective, I should say, not restrictive, of student privacy, that all we could have given was a list of names. But now all students were informed on, I think, July 21st that the policy was being changed so that the appropriate information could be shared with census, and that they had 2 weeks to notify us if they did not want that information shared. I'm guessing in the deluge of information and decisions in which students are operating, that many of them may not have even noticed that email. I know my son, who's a rising junior, it went right over his head. So but it should really help, because in the core of College Town in 2010, the census count only got to 52%. So this actually, this change should make our count better than it has been in the previous census in recent decades.
Great, that's really great to have those updates. And I would mention our email today, you said that somebody said that Ithaca College is doing the same thing with their.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, Doreen Atkins, I think, Doreen at Ithaca College. I think they're actually ahead of us in the reporting process because they did not have to change the directory policy. And a larger percentage of their students live on campus, because at Cornell, right, when you include graduate and professional, it's something like 70% are off campus. So this acceptance by the census of off-campus student data and Cornell's ability to respond should really help.
That's terrific. Thanks for your patience, Anna. Go ahead.
Yeah, just taking it back to Sarah for a second. Hey, Sarah, how you doing? So you had mentioned, and my internet unfortunately was bad for a moment, the event in Elmira, and that Jill Bram would be presenting and talking about a bill. And I was curious what the name of that bill was.
It's the pandemic SNAP bill. So it would extend the pandemic SNAP through 2021, create more eligibility around school districts that are doing some sort of hybrid, because right now it only works if there's no school, in-person school. So it would allow for the hybrids to still have some extra source of SNAP benefit. And it also would qualify seniors and those who are usually getting their meals once a day through the Older Americans Act or some of the other stuff. So it would expand it a little in terms of eligibility, because a lot of those sites are closed too. So it really encompasses the entire sort of feeding programs that aren't working right now, the federal programs, and allowing that to become increased SNAP benefits. And it would automatically enroll you, so you don't have to go through this awful verification process.
Is that event something she's doing on Zoom, or is that in person?
Right now, I mean, we are still waiting to see what happens in the Senate. We are hoping that there is no votes that day and she can get out and she's doing this both in Jamestown and Elmira. So that is our fingers crossed wish. It would be at the food bank of the Southern Tier. We're working with them now to figure out the details.
And then I had one other comment about broadband. I was talking to a constituent recently, and he brought up something that I think is really important for us all to consider, because I think it changes the cost structure of what it would take to really evaluate where there are gaps in broadband. And in particular, that the census census blocks are what are used to determine whether or not there is broadband. So for example, if one house in a census block has broadband, then the entire area is considered to have broadband. But in rural areas, we know that that is absolutely not the case. You could be over, on a dirt road over a hill, the other side of the hill, 3 houses don't have broadband, but the one house that they, captured does. So just reevaluating, what is a proper and effective and appropriate method for counting, and that I think would be important to determine the actual cost of assessing.
Yeah, like I said, in the rural areas, that last mile is so critical. The blocks are way different. The census tracts don't work the same way and should be, because we know that that's the hardest part of broadband. Interesting that it's counted that way. I'll make sure our folks know. I don't know if they do.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from legislators? Hi, Deborah, glad you're here. Good to see you. Any staff questions or agency, Sue, Kate, Natalie? Sue, go ahead.
So, hi, Sarah. I just really want to thank you first for setting up and for the senator coming and Lieutenant Governor, because I think that there were additional conversations came out of that. The great interest was raised. It's really, I think, was a helpful motivator for our community to understand more about what happens with childcare. So I appreciate that. And I also appreciate what you were saying earlier about focusing on the infrastructure, because one of the topics that came up during her presentation is that childcare was in a crisis before the pandemic hit. And that the money that we are looking for now it's critical, but it's stopgap. It's going to try to prevent permanent closures of childcare where we're already short. So I think that our challenge is going to be looking at how does childcare get included in those infrastructure conversations, because it really is. I mean, education sometimes is included there, but early childhood education isn't always included there. So looking ahead.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, because, she obviously was talking about the Child Care Essential Act, which is sort of addressing the pandemic. She wanted to also talk about their sort of longer term fixed legislation, but we thought it might get a little confusing in messaging. But it is the Child Care Stabilization Fund and other things that would, I forget what it's actually called. That's not what it's called. But it addresses sort of those long-term issues of childcare, but to pull it into the infrastructure conversation would be really interesting. I can get you details on what that legislation is, but it addresses pay, training, like all the different things that really make the margins super hard for large providers, and some of the barriers for small in-home family providers. And it's a much more long-term strategy to fix the ecosystem. But I will bring it up as an infrastructure. I think that's really interesting to have it be included in infrastructure talk. So I will flag that for sure for our team.
Thanks.
That's a great idea, Sue. Appreciate that. And Sue also makes a point often that we see a public good. The education of children once they're age 5 is seen as a societal good that we all pay for, whether we have any children or not, whether our children are in the public schools or aged out or private schools. But from 0 to 5, it's seen as, the family's, that is to say, the woman's responsibility. And I think another one of the things that the pandemic has revealed is that doesn't work anymore. And that more than half of essential workers are women, and the vast majority of childcare in the family is provided by women. So that's a train wreck.
We are, it's almost like you were in the car with us, Martha, because there were a lot of tangents happening over our 2 days of childcare events about the reality of how this is really becoming a burden for women. Women are going to have to leave the workforce, particularly looking forward as what school's going to look like. They're going to miss opportunities for advancement and education and salary increases and all these different things. And it's really going to be an even bigger burden than what it already was on many of our working moms. Her long-term stabilization would incentivize businesses to provide on-site childcare. It would, I'm pretty sure it would open basically like UPK to everyone from 3 and up. So there would be a much more, bigger government involvement in earlier childhood education, starting at 3, like many other countries do, particularly in Europe and other places. So there were some strategies around that to make it a public good earlier, but then also make childcare much more flexible for working families on both the employer and employee side. So there is really good data on companies that provide on-site childcare. It's really fascinating to see.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Cornell has had its benefit for lower income staff and faculty or staff, and did a survey. This is Mary Opperman's program, did a survey 10 years so years ago, and found that the main benefit was actually to loyalty to Cornell. The subsidy provided didn't actually change where people had their kids in care as much as it made those employees feel enormously grateful and loyal to the employer. So I would just caution, and I'm going to just keep reading Sue Dale Hall's mind. That's usually a good thing to do. When UPK comes in, there's a funny adverse effect on childcare for younger children, for babies and toddlers. As a whole, the childcare economy is kind of, the 3 to 5s are the least expensive
Because the ratios go higher. Yeah.
So if you pull those kids out of your childcare ecosystem, you have even more pressure on infant toddler costs. So
keep that in mind. Yeah.
UPK is great if there is an accompanying bulk up for the real needs and the cost for infant toddler care. Did I get that right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Sarah? We want to respect your time and deeply appreciate your being here. Anything else? Okay, I have one more. I'm sorry. One more. Okay. The state got child care money in the CARES Act. Last I knew, it still hadn't released all of it. What do we know about that?
It's not.
They have not. And I'm part of our child care task force here in Rochester. And, you know, there's been a lot of trying to push up on what that guidance will look like. And the state's been very mum on it. It's been very frustrating, particularly when our whole issue is like, we're making this case that we need more money for the states to do this, yet the state can't even show us that they've spent the first round, whereas so many other states have already. So that was initially a big concern for us on the federal level. And then we're also hearing from a bunch of employers, particularly in like the healthcare industry that has, they're not the highest paying jobs. They're often nurses and techs that are making, middle-class wages, and they were excluded from some of the scholarship money for childcare in the first round because it was still based on poverty level. Yet they're required to go to work. They're essential. So we're hearing from sort of all different levels of ways to maybe make sure this money is both helping the providers that really need it, making sure we're really also looking at family-based childcare, and then letting the money, sometimes the extra money that's helping with reduced ratios and cover costs here and there, really follow the child wherever the child goes. So it's more in the hands of the, any extra money would be in the hands of some of the folks looking for, who are essential and need to go to work every day. So the state's been frustrating. They also haven't paid some of our childcare development councils yet on, the money that they were supposed to give them for the PPE that they were providing, and their contracts aren't getting paid, and they've even delayed them even further, and it's really putting a heavy strain on the industry. So
we're hearing
a good answer.
Yes, go ahead, Sue.
Well, I was just going to add that one of the limitations of the second round of distribution of the CARES funding was a time frame that did not work at all really for our community, because our programs started back up before the start date. You had to start by June 15th, and we were trying to more in line with our businesses, trying to get people up and running, and then we had to be finished by the end of the month. And so school age programs are completely left out of that. And that right now is a big question, and they're all rushing to try to figure out how they can operate within all the different school district models of how school is going to happen.
Right.
And then how do we care for kids around that? And there's a lot of need for modification and supplies in a very short period of time. So there's clearly needs that have gone unmet of that CARES funding. And I know that's, we would just appreciate any influence you have in trying to help us
And I
convince
would say
New York State to
anything you
loosen
can
up.
pass along, we are trying to push up the state. I mean, the state doesn't always take kindly to us, even though they're federal dollars, take kindly to us giving too much input, but we have created a dialogue with them at least to bring the concerns we're hearing from those on the ground. And we are hearing that there are these issues. And
Does either of you know how much is left in the bucket and how much
I
has
had last heard 73 million, but I don't know if that's still true.
I heard 69, so
Yeah.
that's just subtracting out what I thought had been used.
Yeah.
There could have been some that went unused.
Right.
Okay.
There were some
No announcement?
cleaning issues.
I will say that in any of your conversations up the ladder, that the fact that money previously allocated federal money that's not been spent is one of Ms. McConnell's arguments about why
Exactly.
do any more state and local money. Look, you haven't spent what you've already got. So if anybody whispers that into the governor's ear, okay.
We try.
I know. All right. Well, thanks so much, Sarah. It's great to have you.
Thank you.
And
Good to see everybody.
we will-
Thanks again, Sue, for all your help, and Martha for coming, and Henry, you came. It's great to see everybody with the senator. So thank you.
yeah, in 3D, it was great.
Yay. All right. Enjoy.
Thank you, Sarah. You bet.
Take care.
All right. So great. It's great to have these speakers. For my report, I will just refer to a couple things in the packet. In your packet, I just want to let folks know that I did get appointed to a couple of the NACO committees. That's in your packet. And I would encourage anybody else, I guess they've probably done this for the year, seems to go through, an annual cycle. So, but if you're interested in any of the committees, you can look at the NACO site. I can sort of point you in a direction if you are interested, and maybe they would still accept new members. They got a lot of different committees, and the committees are big. And one of the interesting benefits of being on some NACO calls recently is the opportunity to hear from people from all over the country. I mean, it's pretty cool, when people call in and say they're from Tallahassee or from Boise or somewhere. So, so there's that. And I did email everybody the NISAC resolutions. As you know, the NISAC standing committees are meeting virtually this week, and Deborah was just on one of them. And so they've got a packet of resolutions, their usual packet of resolutions. I emailed that out to you last night or this morning. So take a look at those. If there's anything you want to comment on, I am on that committee that meets on Monday, where the NISAC Resolutions Committee often does edit. I mean, usually things that go through the standing committees get forwarded onto the board and for full approval and advocacy. So you usually actually accept all of the resolutions that come from the committees, but there's often an opportunity to edit and to tweak the language if you've got any suggestions on any of those. So, Deborah.
Yeah, Martha, I was curious. Yesterday, I was in the NISAC Standing Committee on Taxation and Finance, and one of the things that Dave Lucas said was, well, we're getting so much pushback at the federal level because counties in other states aren't dependent on the same revenue streams that we are, and they don't provide the level of services that New York State counties do. And therefore, these senators are not hearing from counties in their state that they're in dire straits. What is your sense of that from NACO? Because I read that NACO report and it looks like counties all over the country are screwed.
I agree. I mean, yes, they are. I think it might be a timing thing, a cash flow thing that where, and I heard this on a couple of NACO calls last week. Every state has like a different formula. Some have no sales tax, some have no property tax, some have no income tax. There are sort of 50 different solutions to how you fund state and local governments. So the states that don't depend on sales tax, those states or counties are less impacted right this minute, so far. If their revenue mostly comes from property tax, they probably got that in already for the year.
Right.
But it extends, if they depend on income tax more, they've already gotten that, or they get that once a year. Those of us, we have a mixture. There are plenty of states that do depend on sales tax. But that's one of the reasons that there's not that much advocacy from certain states where their lost revenue hasn't been as great as our lost revenue. I will say that, Tom Reed, on these calls that several of us have been on, he has agreed that room tax, that hotel tax is included, should be included in the lost revenue calculation. That, it seems, really broadens the base of counties that should care about aid to state and local governments, because some of the least populated states have the national parks, have tourism attractions, et cetera. So, was Dave Lucas, what was he saying in terms of, advocacy or our chances of getting anything? Or was he just explaining why?
Oh, he doesn't know any more than we do. I mean,
Okay.
he just opined that on the whole, most of the counties in most of the states, including the red ones, tend to depend primarily, if not exclusively, on property tax revenues. And they're not going to feel this for another 6 months to 18 months. And then things may change, but by then we're going to be so far underwater. I don't know what's going to happen.
Did he say the pattern tends to be that's true of sort of the red states? Is that?
That was implied, yes.
Okay.
And of course, the red states country didn't seem to get hit by the pandemic the same times frame that New York State and the Northeast did. So maybe it's just a delayed reaction. Who knows?
Right. Yes, and thanks for the email that you sent out with a report from that committee.
I'm sure, just tons of good news.
Yeah, it was. I want to ask you also about the 11:30 meeting you had. That was the Energy and Economic Development. Was that the meeting that you were on?
Yes.
Okay. And you had put in a resolution on, which I thought was great.
It didn't get put on the agenda. It didn't get put on the agenda for this committee. It didn't get put on transportation. We did have some extra time at the end of the meeting. For those of you who are unfamiliar, this was a resolution that was instigated by Tony and Grafia and the Case people. And it deals with the necessity for reducing emissions from the transportation sector in order to meet the 2050 CLCPA emissions reduction goals. And the fact is that at the moment, there's only like one retail outlet for all electric cars in New York State. So people who want to buy an electric car have no place to go to test drive one. They can't see one. If they buy one, they've got to go to this one outlet in Westchester in order to get it serviced. And fortunately, Annie's on this committee too, so she got to talk about this. There was some time to discuss it. We'll just put it on the January agenda. But basically, there's a law in place that was lobbied for by, the franchise car dealerships, which is the model for New York State, so that these retail outlets for smaller manufacturers of all electric cars can't get registration certificates in order to open stores. And the franchise model doesn't work for them because they only manufacture maybe 1 or 2 cars. They're all electric. It's not like they need a whole big showroom to show off all their models and all their trucks, et cetera, et cetera. So anyhow, we did talk about it. The committee didn't seem all that excited about it, but maybe that's good. They'll just pass it. So.
Yeah, I looked at the list and I didn't see it on there, which was disappointing. So, but
yeah, the 2 things that were on there were a resolution to get the governor to release a cellular task force report that he's been sitting on, and then there was a resolution to increase recycling and reduce municipal waste management by expanding the New York State Returnable Container Act. So basically, we want that expanded to glass bottles for all kinds of beverages, including alcoholic beverages.
okay, all right. Well, thanks very much for being on that committee and representing us. So that covers my report. Mike Ziegler, do you have a report as vice chair?
No, just that I've been, sitting in on the same meetings a lot of people are with Tom Reed. Martha's certainly been pushing out contact your Republican legislators. So I've done that, both with him and with other people. And, talked to the chair of the state party as well, because he obviously has inroads that I don't have. But you're going to hear a lot from, I think, from Allison, who's going to be joining us. So I'll let her kind of defer to her, and she's definitely ahead. And Tom was talking just this week that he kind of thought something was going to happen this week, one of these 2 bills. So I'll let her cover all that.
Okay. All right. Thanks a million, Mike. Appreciate that. I don't see anybody on administration unless anybody's hiding in the wings here. We've got county administrator's report. So going once, going twice. All right. Charlie, welcome. Great to see you. Hi. So let us, we are happy at this point to just open the floor to you and Diane, either of you, whatever you'd like to say. In our packet, we did include the letter that Governor Cuomo wrote to the delegate, wrote to Schumer and Gillibrand and the congressional delegation, kind of really putting on in 2 pages the case for state and local aid. So people have read that. But just we're interested to hear, anything you have to offer about what you both hear, is going on.
Maybe I'll just start briefly, and Diane can jump in with any details she has. It's all speculation. Maybe I'll just go backward. I'll mention a few other things I just heard at the tail end there. It's true. Environmental issues. There's been sort of almost a little bit of losing ground. We see this pandemic. A lot of laws, regulations have been either, aren't going enforced. A lot of things have been put off. Like in New York State, we had this plastic bag fee that is not really being enforced at all. And at least from what a lot of people are reporting, there's also a lot of, unrecyclable garbage being generated. A lot of it, again, in the name of safety, protecting people.
PPE.
Yeah, it's really painful to watch and to see where that stuff ends up. And I think a lot of progress has been reversed. And I'm afraid, I don't know exactly what people are doing about it. Maybe longer term, some smart people can think about the environment and how to protect the environment while protecting, public health, and specifically during this kind of a pandemic with the chemicals that are being used to introduce the environment, the PPE, all the disposable. It's painful to watch. And then another environmental topic, the governor, not a shock that he delayed the implementation of this bond act, putting it on the ballot. I think the way he said it was, it'll be on next year's ballot, not this year's. Maybe, give him some credit. Maybe he's figuring, you know what? Why risk it? It could go down. The last thing anybody wants is for one to be put to the voters and be voted down. That's a disaster, because then people get afraid of putting something on a ballot. Maybe he's, politically, he's quite astute, or maybe he's just thinking now's not a good time to spend money on that. Who knows? But took a lot of the wind out of people's sails. That was going to be mostly water related spending, the kind of spending that we need right now. But again, that's done. But just seeing that those kinds of things that are getting put off, that where the environment is suffering, obviously the economy has suffered and is suffering. But it's really sort of painful to watch some of those things. Getting back to the budget, we all are waiting to see this governor. I think he tipped his hand recently when he said, after whatever the next action out of Washington, that's when I will have to then, figure out how I'm going to start cutting, and by how much. I don't know. Maybe Diane has a good, just even guesses, Diane, about what the feds are going to do. Forget timing. I'm just interested in maybe the state. A lot of people that I talk to are betting on Nancy Pelosi getting a lot of what she wants, and she says she wants state and city, local government money. What do you think, Diane?
Well, so you were not, Charlie, you weren't on when Amanda Spellacy and Sarah Clark were giving their reports from Washington. And since Amanda works for Senator Schumer, she's a little closer to the inside baseball. But I will say, from watching this from the outside, Cornell is in the same position as everybody else. We are waiting for the Senate to decide what it's going to do, and how it's going to react to the HEALS Act. The Democrats in the Senate, and then, also majority in the House, have been adamant that this is not adequate to address the situation as it is today, and particularly the state and local, the unemployment in the state and local are the two sticking points. And so the last press report that I read this morning, it said that McConnell is softening up on the unemployment, but that there's still this reluctance to do anything with state and local. And so, as far as I can see, the Democrats haven't pushed back on that. And it seems as though there's still this, we only want to vote on this once. We don't want to do these, bits and pieces, because then you lose the momentum for this. And so, from Cornell's perspective, yes, there's funding for higher education. Yes, there's funding for research, for healthcare in both bills. But without the state and local, we don't exist on the Hill in a vacuum. We're part of the community. And particularly when you look at institutions like Cornell Cooperative Extension, if county budgets don't get some relief, that's we lose an awful lot of capacity there to deliver the kind of services in the community that we have. And so this is still right at the top of our list. And so, we're pushing for that kind of a package. And so I will be, but as far as the timing, nobody likes to give up their August, and that's where they're at right now. So I think there's some pressure to wrap this up quickly, just because folks want to get back home.
And how it relates to the state, again, the governor has given no clues on how he will cut. I think that when you get to these big dollar amounts, the easiest way is across the board. It's easy, it's defensible, and frankly, the only way you're going to reduce spending or cut appropriations is what he's technically doing. The only way you can do that, where it really adds up to a lot, is to go roughly across the board and not exempt any big area of spending. So I think he's going to be forced to do that. Schools, Medicaid, obviously local governments, higher ed. Those are 4 of the 5 or 6 biggest areas, and they're They'll all suffer. You know, SUNY Central, interesting. They told the campuses, again, this is just a little data point. The former budget director, Bob Magna, very close to the governor, he's down at SUNY, and he said that they already have decided that central administration, now it's not a big budget, it's more of just a reference point, that they're going to reduce their spending by 20%. He said this current year, we're gonna cut 20% of the cost of doing business at SUNY Central. They told the campuses that I think unofficially to tell the campuses what the amount of cut would look like, could look like, or what they could plan for. And that's the current year. So you've already gone through almost half the year, and then they tell you, oh, current year spending, you've got to reduce it by 20%. So it's even harder when you don't have the full year to do that.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're looking at.
No, I agree. And just a second, Deborah, I think one thing I did hear was that the schools might really have a little more argument to make that they will need, really need extra money in order to reopen safely at all, so that they might be the more favored child, and as usual, we will be the least.
So I'll just say, yeah, I think it's almost like hard to imagine having sort of seen so many years go, and schools, K-12, they always get an increase year to year. They've always gotten 2-3% increases every year. And that it's a lot of money too. The K-12, again, we all know politically why, and in actuality why. It costs a lot of money, et cetera, to educate kids, and this is throughout the state. But having said that, like you just said, I think you're told, oh, across the board is this percent, including the schools. So hard to just institute that same cut on schools. So I think maybe as in effect a mechanism to justify why the schools won't take an equal share of a cut. Tell you what, we're not cutting the schools by this amount. It's the schools. We can't do that. We're going to give them less of a cut. Oh, and part of the rationale would be we need them to be safe. We need them to be able to execute on their opening plans. It's a crucial time of the year. They have additional, infrastructure, personnel. They have added costs on top of what they would normally have. So you can definitely see an argument could be constructed where the schools don't take their share of the cut, but still they're going to get less. They have to. There's no way you can exempt them. So no, schools are. I say this, when we're talking about reopening higher ed, K-12, you have to do it, but it's impossible. It's just such a part of the economy, such a part of everyone is affected by it, and the state is affected by it. And in order to basically reopen the state, you have to reopen the schools in one way or another. And so there's no getting around that. And everything costs money when you're talking at that scale. So yes, I would not be surprised if they did some kind of a special spending item to stave off the deepest cuts from the schools.
Deborah?
Yeah, well, you trampled all over my question, Martha. Thank you. But I do think, K through 12 is going to be a special case. The political unpopularity of cutting K through 12 substantially, given its dependence on property taxes, suggests that the governor, even our governor, will not do that. So I'm just prepared to pick up the slack.
Right. Agreed.
I don't know about anybody else. I need a drink. It's a very depressing meeting. Allison, welcome. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Meet Charlie Krasansky and Diane Miller from Cornell and Kate Supran from Miller as well. We have a few more minutes to talk with Charlie, so welcome. Henry Granison.
Yes, thank you, Charlie, for your presentation. I had two Cornell specific questions. The first one is, I know that Cornell with a group of other private colleges requested the governor to give them leeway on the 14-day advisory quarantine stay. Has that been officially denied? And also, with the Cornell reactivation plan, does that have to actually be approved by the governor, or is it just a filing that they do with the state and that's it?
I think I caught the first one. So the first question, the 14 day, just say it again, that we're trying to sort of get around some of those rules. Is that what you're getting
Yes,
at?
they said before that a lot of private colleges in New York State requested a waiver from that.
Yep.
And I never heard whether or not, I know Cornell changed their position, but I never heard whether a waiver was denied or whether it just was still in consideration.
Okay. Yeah, we didn't really ask for a waiver. We were looking for ways that we could have students comply.
Right.
Like, could two students in quarantine share a bathroom? Those kinds of things. And they've pretty much, said, no, we're not, sorry. Every individual person has to deal with this the way it is rolled out. They admit that, boy, a lot of people, not just higher ed, industry, you name it, it's really, to use their words, I mean, it's created a lot of unintended, complications and frustrations. So as of now, we're doing the best we can. We've told some students don't come, right?
Right.
And explain the rules, and we're trying to in effect help the state get people to comply with it, and in some cases help ask people not to come to New York. So that's what I know. Yeah. So and there's sort of a steady stream of conversations going back and forth about it, making sure that everybody understands it, and then a lot of it also is timing. The state really, nicely trying to help us figure out how the timing could work. What if you brought students in these days and had them stay here? They're actually trying to problem solve, not just for Cornell, but I think for a lot of schools. So that's been nice.
And my second question was, I know Cornell filed its plan with the state. Does the plan have to actually be specifically approved, or is it just you have to file a plan?
Yeah, good question. So the state does not approve the plan. The plan goes to the Department of Health, the state, and they have it. There's no approval of it. We don't know exactly what could happen next. I mean, presumably they have it. Maybe, let's say somebody deviates from the plan. They can maybe say, hey, wait a second, your plan says this. We don't really, nobody's really told us exactly how the plan could be used, but they really wanted, I think it's very similar to other businesses where if you have a business, I think most businesses have to attest that they're following the state guidance. And we did that. And we, in addition, file this plan. I think at one point, I think they sort of let on that colleges, universities, particularly residential ones, we're sort of a different kind of a business. Not only do you have a business and you have customers in a sense, but you also have people living, on your premises. You have some additional control over them. And so I think that was their rationale for treating higher ed, not just like another business, but for having specific guidance for higher ed, having it affect all of higher ed statewide, like K-12, same thing. So it's not just left up to general rules for in a region, but they saw it was more of a statewide industry. And so we don't really know exactly how the plan that each of us individually filed, how that's going to be treated. There was no formal approval, there's no approval action, but they have it.
Okay.
Thank
All right.
you.
Anna, and then quickly, I don't want to have Allison wait for us too long. Go ahead, last question for Charlie and Diane.
I have a bunch of questions, so maybe we can do a rapid fire so that we don't do a long conversation. But do you know the % of faculty teach that intend to teach online?
I don't. Early on, we thought it was going to be 30%, but feels like a long time ago. So I don't know the number.
So I guess my question for that is, if it's very high, has there been communication to the incoming students that even if they are on campus, it may be significantly an online experience in their dorms or wherever they are?
So I didn't go to, I wasn't a part of the last forum, but I think this has been sort of come up, and I think, so I don't know the specific answers, but I do know that since early on, it's been explained that, a number of classes will be remote. So it'll be a hybrid. That's the term we use. And
Okay.
when explained, it's sort of a mixture of. And then I believe that students can go, I don't know if they can do it yet, but then you look to see, okay, of these 5 classes, oh, that one's online, that one's remote. So, or that one's in person. So I think people can figure that out either now or very soon.
And the study is being redone. We had heard, and there's some discussion about the numbers being inflated of those who are expected to come back anyway, because there wasn't a question that distinguished between grad students and undergrads, and grad students live here full time. So I'm wondering if that survey is going to be redone at any point, or has it been, and is that going to be part of the study design?
So I know that the study, like you said, is being redone. And I know that they're refining some of the numbers. I don't know about that specifically. I've heard conversations about the grad and the undergrad. So I think you may know more about it than I at this point. We do have a meeting either tonight or tomorrow night with people doing that study. So I'm going to learn a lot more about it I think it's tomorrow night. We have another meeting of that committee reviewing that study specifically. So I think that'll definitely come up.
And one last really quick, has there been any discussion about what mental health services or mental health support of the students there's going to be? Because students coming from travel advisory states, students being away from their families, concern about what risk they're putting their families in. Like, there's a million reasons, and I'm wondering, because I haven't seen any discussion at all about the mental health support services.
So actually, it was in our plan. I don't know if it made it into the whole plan, but I know in the early thing, there was a big section on that. Actually, really extensive discussion about that. That was, I think, our Cornell Health identified this early on as that's a very big need that we will have with like the reasons you mentioned, but then just more generally that students these days, they're under enough pressure, and then this thing on top of it. So that's a big feature. We have a very strong center at Cornell Health in this area, being taken very seriously. I don't know a lot more detail than that, but we're also doing a lot of this, and also Diane can talk about this too. We're doing it where these students, they might not be on campus. They still need these services, and we're getting these approvals, and some of it is in the works. Regular approval, so that they don't have to switch a doctor. They can keep using the people that they need, regardless of where they're living, where they're operating from, and doing it online. So we're taking this really seriously. That stuff is a big topic that we identified very, very early on as a bigger need than ever, and it's already a big need, definitely.
Thanks.
All right, thank you both very much. We really, really appreciate Cornell's involvement in these calls and our chance to dig in a little deeper and ask questions. So really appreciate both of you being here. Thank you. Allison, welcome, and I'm glad that you've been able to join us. I know Deborah and Henry and I and sometimes Mike Sigler are on these almost weekly calls that you've had, and we deeply appreciate those chances to hear directly from Tom and from your other staff, and to share our perspective. So we're glad that you're able to join us today. So.
Absolutely. Just for clarification purposes, did you have Senator Schumer and Gillibrand's offices on here already as well?
Yeah. Yes, Amanda Spellacy and Sarah Clark.
And so I figure they've probably gone over quite a bit of the next phase of legislation, which is unfortunately more stalled than we would like. We had anticipated going back to DC this week, as Tom had indicated in his call on Monday. And right now, we are not anticipating now going back until early next week. I know the Senate is still hard at work. I'm sure they gave you an update on that because they're supposed to be on recess starting on Friday. And we're being told that that is a high priority for them to try to reach an agreement by Friday. So that is still their time frame is my understanding, but unfortunately, obviously the House has to wait and see what they pass to know what we're looking at. And there is a high potential that the Senate will likely leave and just kind of throw it over to the House. So we're hopeful it is a bipartisan piece of legislation coming on the Senate. We anticipate it will be. All indications are that they're negotiating to reach that, bipartisan need. There are obviously mutually agreed upon things that I think both sides agree that we need to fund, but it's the levels that they're funded at. You saw similar provisions in the HEALS Act that you saw in the HEROES Act, but the money amounts are obviously significantly different. I think most of you know Tom is his top priorities really. I mean, there's several that I could name, but local aid has obviously been one of his top priorities. And then also looking at the school childcare situation, which I'm came in on the tail end of some of that conversation more on the university side, but it's going to be important from babies up to obviously the universities, and we realize that, and getting a funding pot for our daycares so people can return to work if they're able to, if they can't work remotely, and also so that K through 12, as they transition, we know some's going to be, many are doing a remote / in-person hybrid model. It's typically what we were seeing from our school districts in our region. Obviously, childcare will continue to be important in that, but also making sure that they have the dollars they need to be able to fund. We had actually a call with our superintendents and principals on last Friday, I believe it was. And just the expenses related to making sure that the schools are clean are expenses that they've never seen before. And it's going to require the same amount of work, whether the kids are in the building one day a week or every day. And so that's something that we certainly recognize. Also, keeping the staff safe. They want to make sure that they have a good amount of substitute teachers, which is also a worry of theirs. So something hearing loud and clear from there is there needs to be a separate pot for the K through 12 and for the child care sphere. And Tom is fully supportive of that. It's been a very interesting, really realizing how much child care and the K through 12 system impact our entire economy in regards to just people being able to work. Unemployment also continues to be a pretty significant issue. It's not one we've talked about as much. I can tell you that we have gotten a lot of feedback from across the district that while many people would like to see a continued elevated level, because we realize that unemployment does not make up for all the lost income. $600 is probably a bit too high for our region. Not saying for everywhere in the United States. Obviously in New York City, it's quite a bit different than living here. And living expenses vary just across our district. And we recognize that. So we would like to see, and what's proposed in the HEALS Act, is that they can get to a point where they can do a calculation based on your actual previous wages rather than just a lump sum of 600, because we are seeing some people that were even part-time. I've heard from restaurant owners, they had, people making $120 a week and now they're making 600 on unemployment. And it's frustrating for those essential frontline workers. I'm sure many of you have, talked to people that, grocery store workers, nurses, people on the front lines. It's frustrating for them when they see somebody on unemployment making more than they previously made being home. But there is a reason for unemployment too, and we certainly understand that there are people that have health conditions that don't allow them to return to work. So there's going to have to be some of that discussion as well. What else did I want to mention? Stimulus checks. We've been advocating in the HEALS Act. It's a $1,200, same as it was before. We've been advocating for stimulus, a greater stimulus for people that remained working during this time. Our frontline workers. That is something Tom put out there, especially because of the kind of the emotional, mental, and as I just mentioned, people working at home potentially making more money than they were before, and somebody on the front lines not receiving any additional pay. Psychologically, that hasn't been great for some of them either, not feeling like they're appreciated during this time that we're going through. I don't know if that will make it in the final bill. We see the HEALS Act as kind of like the HEROES Act was a starting point for the House. The HEALS Act is certainly the starting point for the Senate. I'm anticipating it will be somewhere in the middle. For the unemployment, they proposed $200 a week in the HEALS Act. I would anticipate you'll probably see it elevated from that into the $300 or $400 range. But we have not seen any final numbers yet, unfortunately. Every time I do one of these calls, I say, as I'm preparing, I say, I hope we have more concrete information for you when we get there, as we hoped we would have on Monday. And unfortunately, we just don't. I'm hoping that Senator's office maybe was able to give you a little more concrete information on numbers, as they're heavily involved in the negotiation with the White House. But it sounds like mom's the word right now in regards to where they're at. I just don't, we're hopeful to see some real movement in the next 48 hours. We know the senators are eager to leave DC, is what we're hearing. So, Deb?
Yeah, I would say we didn't hear anything from Sarah or Amanda that was radically different from what's in the press.
Yeah, unfortunately. And I just, I think when it starts to move, it'll probably move real fast. Because as I said, everything that we're hearing, just word of mouth coming out of DC, is that the senators want to leave on Friday. So, and I don't believe they want to return. So I think that might be a little bit of an incentive to reach a deal.
Deborah.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Long time no see,
I know. I think I just gave you all the same information we discussed on Monday, but.
Well, I'm curious though, as I understand the process, if there's a Senate bill and a House bill, there needs to be a conference. If the senators are gone, how do they confer?
So there does not have to be a conference. If the House just decides to take up the Senate bill, they can. And our anticipation is that that's kind of where the Senate's going to leave it, is take it or leave it at this point.
The House is not recessing at the end of this week.
The House is not in. So we were actually supposed to be done. What's the date today? So we were supposed to be done at the end of July last week. And so we were anticipating that we were going to so Tom returned to DC, or returned to New York at the end of last week. We were anticipating that he did go down to DC this week, but not to vote. But we were anticipating that they would be voting earlier this week on a bill, because we knew the Senate had to be out by Friday. So then we were thinking, okay, when they got to last week and hadn't reached a deal, we were thinking he'd be going Wednesday or Thursday of this week, because they have to give them 24 hours to return to vote, is what the guidelines are right now. And so we do not anticipate, so we will return whenever they give us the 24 hours notice. So, which makes my job a little tricky, because I'm trying to schedule Tom here in the district a little bit too, and everything's just completely up in the air. But whenever they give him the 24 hours notice, he'll be returning to DC, and that could be Friday, it could be next Monday. We're not sure yet. Could be over the weekend.
So whatever the Senate agrees to, it's take it or leave it. And if the House doesn't take it, this round of stimulus is dead. Until when?
If the Senate could come back, what we're anticipating at this point is that they'll pass it, they'll go on recess, and they'll kind of wait to see what the House does. But it's kind of like their power move to say, that's it, that's all you got. But our anticipation with this bill is that it will be a compromise bill in the Senate. It'll get Democrats and Republicans voting for it. And so it'll be something that the House can digest and vote for. I don't
So
think you're going to see it go through the Senate right now that the House couldn't pass.
So the Democratic leadership in the House is probably working with the Democratic leadership in the Senate.
I would assume
on
that
the
Speaker
negotiations.
Pelosi is working with with Schumer in that conversation that he is having with the White House in regards to trying to reach a deal. Yeah, I would assume that they're getting input. I mean, and the HEROES Act was basically the starting point for the House. So, I mean, they know what the House starting point is already. The Senate's not going to vote on that, but they do know what the House starting point is. And, you know, obviously McConnell put out his starting point. So there's material to work from. I think it's just finding that middle ground. And it sounds like there's only a few items left, as Tom mentioned on Monday. You know, really came down to the local aid, the unemployment amount, and liability, which is huge, which is something that a lot of people don't talk about regularly because it doesn't, you know, not direct dollars, but it's huge right now as well.
But I understand from the press, McConnell doesn't have enough votes to pass a bill by himself.
I don't know if that's accurate or not. I haven't seen I mean, obviously we're not part of the whip team on the Senate side. I've seen the press report that as well. I don't know if he does or not, to be quite frank with you. I don't think that that's going to be the final bill that gets brought up on the floor anyways. Again, political maneuvering. The initial version of the HEALS Act is political maneuvering, and the HEROES Act was political maneuvering. It's unfortunately that's the way it's working. It's working right now down there.
Right, but if the press if he loses 20 who won't vote for anything, then I don't see how he passes anything without Democrats.
You mean they're on the Republican side so far to the right, or? Yeah, that's what you're, okay. I just wanted to make sure. And there are some, I'm sure there are some Republican senators. I don't think you'll lose 20. I just can't see that many of them voting against it. I think you'll lose a few. There are absolutely some that don't want another stimulus. They just don't believe in as much stimulus as we're doing. But I don't think there's not 20 of them. Okay. You might lose a handful.
Okay. Anna?
Yeah, I think the 20 number came earlier on in this conversation with the Senate representatives that we're talking to. So, seems to be a bit up in the air. I'm curious because Tom is closer to the White House, you know, and Republicans in the Senate maybe than some of the Democrats we have. I'm curious if he has heard or pushed for, I know he was pushing and told us he was pushing for the state and local funding. Has there been any movement, any flexibility, any opening among Republican senators or the White House on that front?
There has been with some other Republican senators that he has spoken with. He has expressed his opinion to the White House. I don't know if they've given an indication on where they're going to fall. Obviously, he's been pretty vocally supportive of local aid with his colleagues as well as the White House. I mean, we put out a number of statements about it that are out there nationally as well as locally in the press. I don't think the White House has given him an indication because I think they're keeping that negotiation with the Democratic senators, to be quite frank with you. So I haven't heard anything from him directly. He was there yesterday. I'm just forgetting what date it is. Yesterday. I haven't had a chance to speak with him since then, to be honest with you. He went for a bill signing at the White House yesterday on an unrelated issue. But he was going to try to speak with some of the White House leadership again yesterday. I would say that there is some flexibility with the Republican senators as the numbers get worse in some of the other states. They have loosened their positions. Not every Republican senator. Some of them are diehard. You know, you get both sides of the aisle. You get the sphere of where they fall. But some of the Republican senators have certainly changed their position as the numbers have increased in their own states. And they're getting their governors pushing on them a little bit as well as their states lose funding.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's interesting. We just happened to be the first one hit, so we were obviously pushing a little bit sooner than others. But as the numbers have as we've seen that wave in certain areas, they've definitely softened a bit and understanding the need.
All right. Henry?
Yes, thank you, Allison, for coming. I was wondering, I know with the other two stimulus bills that are passed pretty much unanimously in the Senate, I've heard that if they don't get passed unanimously in the Senate, they could be held up by like 5 senators.
So I don't know if there is a way for one senator to put a stop on a bill, but it's usually an individual bill, not a package like this. I don't believe any one senator could put a stop on this piece of legislation. There are individual bills where if one senator has an issue, there is and this does not exist in the House, so I am probably not the person to ask. I just know we've actually had it done with one of our own bills in the past. It wasn't even about our bill. It was the senator wanted something else. And so there's a way to hold up for one single senator to hold up a piece of an individual piece of legislation in the Senate, but I don't believe they can do it for a full package.
Also, I know Tom in his bill was talking about direct payments to the state, to the localities.
Mm-hmm.
I think he mentioned something on Monday. Is that still under consideration?
So in the Senate version, it's not the way that we would like to see it, to be honest with you. I know that the money goes directly to the states. Obviously, we're hopeful it makes it where it's supposed to go. We would rather see direct aid go to where it's supposed to go. We just have concerns. We're trying to write the legislation in a way that if the state did receive the aid directly, it would end up going where it's supposed to go, but we just have some historical concerns that cause us to want to make sure it goes directly to municipalities. We'd love to do that actually also with school districts, but that's even more complicated because they actually also, and I think it was either the 2.5 or 3. They received, I think it was 2.5. They received funding from the federal government, and they had some of their state aid taken back. Again, another thing that we don't want to see. And we think that if the state receives state funding, we're hopeful that he won't withhold any state funding from going to the local level. If he feels like he's being made whole. I'm not sure what the end number is going to be for the state though. But again, it's not the HEALS Act does not have it exactly how that we would like to see the aid going directly to the local government, not in the capacity that we would like to see it. So we're not super happy with the first draft either of the HEALS Act in regards to that.
But it does have a maintenance of effort.
It does, but I don't think that you're going to see as much money go to the local level in the way that they have it in the HEALS Act as is required. I mean, there's significant loss at the local level, and I think that it does have maintenance of efforts, but it's not to the level of funding that we would need at the local level.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I heard a phrase today that the devil.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Martha.
I heard a phrase say that the devil and the angels are in the details. So.
Yeah, and there's good, like I said, there's good and bad in both bills, as you'll usually see, and it's just finding that happy medium. Somebody's going to be unhappy no matter what we do, as you all know, as county legislators. Usually, you're pissing somebody off at the same time you're making somebody happy. So it's actually very nice. I feel like we're not typically on the same page as our senators, but I think here we're actually all in the same fight, and it's we're all pretty close to the same page in regards as to what we would like to see happen. So it's been a good partnership with them to try to push this forward and get some of the other states on board.
One thing I've noticed in the HEALS Act, they're offering flexibility, a little bit of greater flexibility for the previous $150 billion that went to states and larger municipalities. However, looking at the language, the more detailed language, it's really a catch-22. It's sort of, you can spend 25% on loss of revenue but only if you give up another 25% to your sort of smaller, lesser municipalities. That feels to me like not any kind of grant. No, I mean, first off, there's no new money for state or local governments in the HEALS Act, and this claim of flexibility is really not useful at all.
And you know what the interesting thing about the first round of state funding that went through and the funding that went through to the municipalities of 500,000 or more. New York State did use more of the funding than the national percentage, but I believe it was 25%, only 25% of the funds that went out have actually been used. And I think part of it is the complications of how strict they were and how that money could be used. But also, this did not come from Tom. I'm assuming it came from another probably senator that was concerned about the state not giving the money out to the local level. I mean, I think that's where that comes from, but I would agree with you in the end is that you have to loosen some of the restrictions as well in order for, loss of revenue can be a number of things right now too. I don't know who wrote that regulation. Just in my mindset, I would have a feeling that it was somebody that was seeing their state withhold money from local governments, just like we feel here. And is it trying to address it in that way? I don't know if that's the most impactful way. That's not something that we proposed, but I think that's just where that would generate from. But we obviously need more funding, and it's not going to be solved by just using the rest of that pot, and we definitely recognize that. So
yes, absolutely.
Yes, loosening of regulations, absolutely. More money for local and state. We do recognize that, even if we give money to all of you and don't give it to the state's going to withhold money anyways.
Well, we're so connected, basically.
That's true.
Half of our budget, we say we pass such and such a budget, but our full budget is twice that because of the state revenues that go back and forth. So we're just completely, intertwined.
No, absolutely. No, I definitely recognize that. I think any elected official just wants to make sure that the money that is being sent to the state, some states already had, obviously New York was going to have some level of budget deficit. That's kind of up for debate, but nobody wants to make up for the previous deficits, is what the concern has been, but there's obviously more deficit than what we've appropriated at this point, and we understand that.
Plenty of deficit to go around.
Unfortunately, yes, as you said, not a positive call, as you said when I was getting on. But I think you're going to see some good news. 48 hours from now, hopefully we'll have some kind of deal struck. And we're going to, like I said, I know Tom is at the White House. He is beating that horse, as they say, for local aid. Obviously, like I said, we've been talking about nursing homes and schools and all that, but local aid has been his number one thing. We hear you loud and clear. And we didn't have any municipality receive funding in that first round. We don't have anybody over 500,000 in our district. You all know that. No
Right.
county, not even close.
Right.
So
absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Allison. Are there any other questions from anybody on the call here?
And we'll be doing another local call with local elected official call with Tom probably early next week if we have all the final details, which I think we will by then. I don't want to speak too soon, but keep your fingers crossed.
Let's hope. Well, thank you very, very much for being here and for everything that you're doing to keep us in touch and to have a two-way conversation. We really appreciate it. So give our best to the congressman, and thank you very much.
Thanks.
All
Thanks,
right.
Alice.
The last little bit of business we have is the minutes from July 1st. Do we have a motion for that? Those minutes. Moved by Anna, seconded by Deborah. Any discussion, questions? All right, I'll do the roll call. Deborah?
Aye.
Anna?
Aye.
Shauna?
Yes.
Henry?
Yes.
Mike Sigler?
Yes.
Mike Lane?
Yes.
And I am a yes on the minutes. So thank you all for another jam-packed discussion. And with that, is there any other last business to bring up or questions or thoughts? All right, then let's call a meeting adjourned and thank you all. Have a good rest of your week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Bye.